The blood on Eleanor Kane's hands would not wash away no matter how hard she scrubbed them in the basin, though the doctor had told her 3 times already that her father was beyond saving before she even found him collapsed in the stable. She stood at the window of her family's ranch house near Rock Springs, Wyoming, watching the sun disappear behind the red cliffs in the distance, wondering how she was supposed to run a cattle ranch alone at 22 years old in the summer of 1882. Her father had been everything to her after her mother died of fever 5 years ago, and now the weight of his absence pressed against her chest like a boulder she could not move. The ranch hands had already begun to whisper. She heard them during supper, their voices carrying through the thin walls as they discussed whether a woman could manage 2,000 acres and 300 head of cattle. Some talked about finding work elsewhere before the operation fell apart. Others spoke of neighboring ranchers who would surely make offers to buy the land now that Thomas Kane was gone and buried. Eleanor wanted to march out there and tell them all she would prove them wrong, but the truth was she did not know if she could. Her father had taught her to ride and rope and shoot, but the business side of ranching remained mostly mysterious to her, kept in ledgers she was only beginning to understand. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She dried her hands on her apron and opened it to find Gerald Morrison, whose property bordered hers to the east. He held his hat in his hands, his round face arranged in an expression of concern that did not quite reach his calculating eyes. "Miss Kane, I wanted to pay my respects again and see how you are managing," he said. "I am managing fine, thank you, Mr. Morrison," Eleanor replied, not inviting him inside. "I know this must be a difficult time. Running a ranch is hard work for anyone, let alone a young woman on her own. I wanted you to know that I would be willing to take this burden off your shoulders. I can offer you a fair price for the land and cattle, enough for you to live comfortably in town or perhaps return east to family." Eleanor felt her spine stiffen. "This is my home, Mr. Morrison. I have no intention of selling. Now, Miss Kane, be reasonable. What do you know about managing ranch finances, negotiating with buyers, handling difficult animals and difficult men? Your father, God rest him, would not want you to struggle." "My father would want me to fight for what is mine," Eleanor said, her voice harder now. "Good evening, Mr. Morrison." She closed the door before he could respond, then leaned against it, her heart pounding. Through the window, she watched him mount his horse and ride away, his posture stiff with displeasure. She knew he would be back. Men like Gerald Morrison did not give up easily when they saw opportunity. The next morning, Eleanor woke before dawn as she always had. She dressed in her split riding skirt and boots, pinned her dark blonde hair into a practical bun, and headed out to the stable. The ranch hands were already gathering for their assignments. Jack Palmer, her father's foreman, stood among them, a weathered man in his 50s who had worked the Kane ranch for 20 years. "Morning, Miss Kane," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Good morning, Jack. I want to ride out and check the north pasture today. Father mentioned some fence damage last week that needed addressing." Jack shifted his weight. "I can send a couple of boys to handle that, miss. No need for you to ride all that way." "I need to see the ranch, Jack, all of it. I need to understand what we are dealing with." Something flickered across his face, respect perhaps, and he nodded. "I will send Tom and Billy to ride with you." "That is not necessary." "With respect, Miss Kane, it is. This is still wild country. You should not ride alone that far from the house." Eleanor wanted to argue but recognized the wisdom in his words. "Very well. Have them ready in 20 minutes." She took breakfast in the kitchen, forcing herself to eat though she had little appetite. The cook, Mrs. Henley, who had been with the family since Eleanor was a child, fussed over her like a mother hen. "You hardly ate anything yesterday, and you are getting too thin," the older woman scolded. "Your father would want you to take care of yourself." "Everyone seems very certain about what my father would want," Eleanor said, but she smiled to soften the words. "I am eating, see." She finished her eggs and biscuits, drank her coffee, and headed to the stable. Tom and Billy were already mounted and waiting. Both were young men, barely older than Eleanor herself, and they looked uncomfortable with the assignment. The ride to the north pasture took over an hour. The land rolled out in waves of golden grass, dotted with cattle bearing her father's brand. The morning sun climbed higher, promising another hot August day. Eleanor tried to see the ranch as her father had, to understand the decisions he made about where to graze, where to plant, where to preserve. It was overwhelming. They found the damaged fence exactly where her father had noted it in his ledger. Several posts had rotted through, and the wire sagged dangerously. Tom and Billy set to work making repairs while Eleanor surveyed the surrounding area. The cattle here looked healthy, which was something. In the distance, she could see the beginnings of Morrison's land, marked by a line of cottonwood trees along a creek. That was when she saw the rider. He came from the west, moving at an easy pace on a gray horse that looked like it had traveled many miles. As he drew closer, Eleanor could make out more details. Tall, lean, wearing a dusty black hat and trail-worn clothes, a bedroll and saddlebags suggesting he carried everything he owned with him. A drifter, then, probably looking for work or a meal before moving on. They passed through regularly, men with no ties and no plans beyond the next town. He reined in his horse a respectful distance away and touched his hat brim. "Morning, madam." Eleanor studied him. He had a strong jaw shadowed with several days of stubble, and eyes the color of a winter sky, pale gray and striking against his sun-bronzed skin. He looked to be in his late 20s, and despite the dust of the trail, he sat his horse with the easy confidence of a man who had spent his life in the saddle. "Good morning," Eleanor replied, keeping her voice neutral. "I was wondering if you might be able to point me toward Rock Springs. I seem to have drifted a bit off course. You are on Kane Ranch land. Rock Springs is about 8 miles southeast." She pointed toward the direction of town. "Much obliged." He started to turn his horse, then paused. "Kane Ranch, you said. I heard in the last town that Thomas Kane passed recently." "My condolences if you knew him. He was my father." The man's expression shifted, genuine sympathy replacing casual politeness. "I am sorry for your loss, madam. Tom Kane had a reputation as an honest rancher, which is rare enough to be notable. You knew him." "Not personally, but I have worked ranches from Texas to Montana. A man hears things. Good things in your father's case." He hesitated. "If you are in need of an extra hand, I am willing to work. I am good with horses and cattle, can mend fence, break broncs if needed. I would work for fair wages and meals." Eleanor considered this. She did need more help, especially with some of the hands already looking toward other prospects, but she knew nothing about this stranger except that he looked capable and spoke with courtesy. "What is your name?" "Carson Jones, madam." "I am Eleanor Kane. I will be frank with you, Mr. Jones. I have just inherited this ranch, and there are many who doubt my ability to run it. I need hands I can trust, not men who will take their wages and leave at the first sign of difficulty. Why should I hire you?" Carson Jones regarded her steadily, and she had the sense of being truly seen, not dismissed as so many men had dismissed her in recent days. "I cannot give you a reason to trust me, Miss Kane. Trust has to be earned, but I can tell you that I am tired of drifting. I have been looking for a place worth staying at and a cause worth working for. If you are willing to take a chance on me, I will give you 2 weeks of work for free. At the end of that time, if you want me to move on, I will go with no argument. If you want me to stay, we can discuss terms. It was a generous offer, perhaps too generous, but something in his steady gaze made Eleanor want to accept. She needed help, and he was offering it on terms that cost her nothing but the risk of trusting him. Very well, Mr. Jones. 2 weeks. Report to Jack Palmer at the main house. He is the foreman and will assign your duties and show you the bunkhouse. Thank you, Miss Kane. You would not regret this. I hope not, Mr. Jones. He touched his hat brim again and rode off in the direction she had indicated. Tom and Billy had stopped working to watch the exchange, their expressions curious. You taking on drifters now, Miss Kane? Tom asked, not quite managing to keep the skepticism from his voice. We are short-handed, and he is willing to work. 2 weeks will tell us what kind of man he is. She remounted her horse and led them back toward the ranch. But her mind kept returning to the pale gray eyes of Carson Jones and the quiet confidence in his voice. She wondered what had brought a man like that to her door, what he was drifting from or toward, and whether she had just made a wise decision or a foolish one. When they returned to the ranch, Carson Jones was already there, speaking with Jack Palmer near the barn. The foreman looked skeptical but nodded at whatever Carson was saying. Eleanor dismounted and handed her reins to one of the stable boys, then approached them. Jack, this is Carson Jones. He will be working here for a trial period. Jack sized up the newcomer with an experienced eye. We will see how you handle yourself. There is a bunk available in the far corner. Supper is at 6. We start work at dawn. Miss Kane runs this ranch and her word is law. Anyone who has a problem with that can draw their pay and ride out. Understood? Understood, Carson said simply. Eleanor felt a flash of gratitude toward Jack for making her authority clear from the start. Mr. Jones, I hope you find the arrangement satisfactory. I am sure I will, Miss Kane. Over the next few days, Eleanor found herself increasingly aware of Carson Jones, though she tried not to watch him too obviously. He worked hard. She had to grant him that. He showed up before dawn each morning and worked until dark, taking on whatever tasks Jack assigned without complaint. He had a way with horses that impressed even the most experienced hands. She watched from the corral fence one afternoon as he worked with a young stallion that had been giving everyone trouble, his movements patient and calm until the animal settled under his touch. That drifter knows his way around horses, Jack commented, coming to stand beside her. I will give him that. He does seem capable, more than capable. He works like a man with something to prove. Jack glanced at her. Or like a man running from something. You know anything about his past? No, and I did not ask. A man is entitled to his privacy. A man is, but you should still be careful, Miss Kane. We do not know anything about him. Eleanor knew Jack was right, but something in her resisted the warning. Carson had been nothing but respectful and hardworking since he arrived. He kept to himself mostly, ate his meals quickly and returned to work, spoke when spoken to but did not push himself into conversations. Some of the other hands had tried to draw him out, asking the usual questions about where he came from and where he was headed, but he deflected with the skill of long practice. The only time she really spoke with him was when she made her rounds of the ranch each evening before supper. She had decided that if she was going to run this operation, she needed to know every inch of it, needed to understand what was happening in every pasture and pen. Carson was repairing a water trough when she came across him on the 4th day of his employment. "How are you settling in, Mr. Jones?" she asked. He straightened, wiping sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. "Very well, thank you, Miss Kane. You have a good operation here. Your father built something solid." "He did, and I intend to keep it that way." "I do not doubt it." There was no condescension in his tone, just simple statement of fact. "You work harder than most men I have seen, Mr. Jones. Harder than you need to, considering I am not paying you yet. I do not believe in doing things halfway." Eleanor studied him for a moment. In the late afternoon light, his eyes looked even paler, almost silver. "Where are you from originally?" "Texas, mostly. My father had a small ranch near San Antonio. He lost it after the war." "I am sorry. It was a long time ago." He picked up his hammer again, signaling the end of the personal revelation. Eleanor took the hint and moved on, but she felt like she understood him a little better. He was the son of a man who had lost everything, drifting because he had no home to return to. The thought made her sad in a way she could not quite explain. On the 6th day, trouble arrived in the form of Gerald Morrison and 3 of his men. Eleanor was working in her father's study, trying to make sense of the ledgers, when Mrs. Henley knocked urgently on the door. "Miss Kane, Mr. Morrison is here with some of his hands. They are causing a commotion in the yard." Eleanor felt her stomach tighten but kept her expression calm. She rose and walked outside, where Morrison sat on his horse surrounded by Jack Carson and several of her other men. The tension in the air was palpable. "Mr. Morrison, to what do I owe this visit?" "Miss Kane, 3 of my cattle were found on your land this morning, and one of your hands refuses to return them." Eleanor looked at Jack, who stepped forward. "Those cattle were on our side of the property line, Mr. Morrison, bearing your brand. We were holding them until we could contact you about retrieving them, as is customary. No one refused anything. My man says different. Says one of your drifters got aggressive when he tried to collect what is mine." Eleanor's gaze shifted to Carson, who stood with his thumbs hooked in his belt, his expression neutral but alert. "Mr. Jones, what happened?" "One of Mr. Morrison's hands crossed onto your land and tried to drive off not just the 3 cattle with Morrison's brand, but also 5 bearing yours. When I pointed out the discrepancy, he became belligerent. I suggested he wait while I fetched Mr. Palmer to sort things out properly. He took exception to that suggestion." Morrison's face reddened. "Are you calling my man a thief?" "I am saying there was a mistake that needed clearing up before animals changed hands," Carson said evenly. "Your 3 cattle are in the holding pen, waiting for you to claim them properly." Eleanor could see Morrison trying to find an angle of attack and failing. Carson had handled the situation exactly correctly, and Morrison knew it, but the man was not ready to give up. "I do not appreciate having my word questioned by some drifter who just showed up. You should be more careful about who you hire, Miss Kane. A woman on her own cannot be too cautious." The implied threat hung in the air. Eleanor felt her anger rise but kept her voice steady. "Mr. Jones is my employee, and he acted appropriately to protect my property. Your cattle are waiting for you. Please collect them and leave my land." For a moment, she thought Morrison might push further, but Carson had shifted his stance almost imperceptibly, and several of her other hands had moved closer, a silent show of solidarity that surprised and heartened her. Morrison apparently decided this was not the time for confrontation. "This is not over, Miss Kane. You are going to fail, and when you do, I will be there to buy this ranch at auction. Might as well save yourself the trouble and sell now." He wheeled his horse around and rode toward the holding pen, his men following. The tension did not ease until they had collected their cattle and ridden off the property. "Thank you," Eleanor said quietly to Carson. "You did the right thing. Just doing my job, Miss Kane." "No, it was more than that. You stood up for this ranch and you barely know us." Something flickered across his face, an emotion too quick to identify. "Maybe I am starting to know you well enough." The words seemed to carry more weight than they should, and Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks. She turned quickly to address Jack and the others. "Everyone back to work. And Jack, I want the property lines checked regularly from now on. If Morrison is testing us, I want to know immediately." That evening, she found Carson sitting on the corral fence after supper, watching the sun set over the distant mountains. She approached hesitantly, not sure why she felt drawn to talk to him but unable to resist. "You did not have to put yourself in the middle of that situation today," she said. "Morrison is not a man to cross lightly. Neither are you, apparently." He glanced at her with something that might have been admiration. "You handled him well." "I handled him like someone barely holding on to control of her property. He will be back, probably with a better strategy next time." "Maybe, but he will know you have people willing to stand with you. That counts for something." Eleanor climbed up to sit on the fence beside him, propriety be damned. She was tired of always worrying about appearances. "Why did you really come here, Mr. Jones?" "Do not tell me you just happened to be passing through. Rock Springs is not on the way to anywhere." He was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the darkening landscape. "I told you I was tired of drifting. That was true. I have been moving from place to place for 10 years, ever since my father died and I lost what little family I had left. Working ranches, breaking horses, taking whatever jobs came along. Never staying long enough to put down roots because roots can be torn up, and I had seen enough of that." "What changed?" "I do not know if anything changed or if I just finally got tired of running." He turned to look at her directly. "When I heard about your father passing and you trying to hold this place together, something pulled at me. Maybe I saw a chance to be part of something that mattered. Maybe I was just looking for a reason to stop moving." Eleanor felt her heart beat faster. "And have you found that reason?" "I am starting to think I might have." The air between them felt charged, full of unspoken possibilities. Eleanor knew she should climb down from the fence, return to the house, maintain proper distance between herself and a ranch hand she had known for less than a week. Instead, she stayed where she was. "Your 2 weeks are almost up," she said quietly. "Have you given any thought to what comes after?" "Every day," Carson said. "Every single day." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge overhead, and Eleanor felt something shift inside her, some wall she had built after her father's death beginning to crack. She barely knew this man, but she felt safer sitting beside him than she had felt since finding her father collapsed in the stable. The next week brought more challenges. A water source dried up and had to be replaced. 2 hands gave notice, lured away by promises of easier work on a ranch that did not have the uncertainty of female ownership hanging over it. Supplies arrived short from town with no explanation, except that sometimes things got miscounted. Eleanor suspected Morrison's influence, but could not prove it. Through it all, Carson worked steadily, and Eleanor found herself relying on him more and more. He had a good head for problem-solving and was not afraid to offer suggestions when asked. More than that, his calm presence seemed to steady the other men. Even Jack, initially skeptical, began to defer to Carson's judgment on horse-related matters. "You are going to offer him a permanent position, are not you?" Jack asked one evening. "I am considering it. What do you think?" "I think he is the most capable hand we have got, and I think he is sweet on you, which complicates things." Eleanor felt her face heat. "That is ridiculous." "Is it? I have seen the way he looks at you when you are not watching, and I have seen the way you look at him." "Jack, I am not judging Miss Kane. Your father would have wanted you to be happy. And Jones seems like a decent man as far as I can tell. I am just saying be careful. Mixing business with personal feelings can get complicated." Eleanor knew he was right, but her heart had already started down a path her head knew was dangerous. She thought about Carson constantly. The way he gentled horses, the quiet competence with which he approached every task, the rare smile that transformed his serious face. And yes, the way he looked at her sometimes, like she was something precious and strong at the same time. On the 14th day of his trial period, Eleanor found Carson working alone in the barn, mending tack by lantern light. Most of the other hands had already turned in for the night. She had spent the evening going over figures, trying to determine if she could afford to hire him permanently, trying to convince herself that was the only reason she wanted him to stay. "Mr. Jones, might I have a word?" He set down the bridle he was working on and gave her his full attention. "Of course, Miss Kane." Now that the moment was here, Eleanor found herself uncertain how to begin. "Your 2 weeks are up tomorrow. I wanted to discuss whether you plan to move on or if you might consider staying." "I have been considering it," he said carefully. "But I need to know something first. Why do you want me to stay? Is it just because you need hands, or is there another reason?" His directness caught her off guard. She could give him the safe answer, the business-like response that would keep everything professional. But she was tired of being safe, tired of holding everything inside while the world pressed down on her shoulders. "There are other reasons," she admitted quietly. "Reasons I probably should not have, considering I am your employer and I barely know you. But yes, there are other reasons." Carson stood and crossed the space between them, stopping close enough that she could see the lantern light reflected in his eyes. "I need you to understand something, Eleanor. I did not plan this. I did not come here looking for anything except work and maybe a place to rest for a while. But from the moment I met you, something changed. You are the strongest woman I have ever encountered, and the kindest, and the most beautiful. I know I have no right to feel this way. I have nothing to offer you except the work of my hands and whatever protection I can provide. But if you are asking me to stay, I need you to know it would not be just as your employee." Eleanor's breath caught. No one had ever spoken to her like that, with such raw honesty and vulnerability. "What are you saying?" "I am saying I am staying for you. Not just for a job, not just until something better comes along. For you, Eleanor. If you will have me." The world seemed to narrow down to just the two of them in the warm circle of lantern light, the smell of hay and leather surrounding them, the distant sound of horses settling for the night. Eleanor knew this was a moment that would define everything that came after. She could step back, return to safety, keep her heart protected behind walls of propriety and caution. Or she could step forward into the unknown. She stepped forward. "I will have you," she whispered. "Carson, I will have you." He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face gently in his work-roughened hands. "I cannot promise you easy times. I cannot promise I will always know the right thing to do. But I can promise I will stand beside you through whatever comes, for as long as you will let me." "That is all I need," Eleanor said, and then his lips were on hers, gentle at first and then deeper as she responded, her hands coming up to grip his shoulders, feeling the solid strength of him. The kiss tasted of hope and promise, and the beginning of something that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Carson rested his forehead against hers. "I have been wanting to do that since the moment I saw you standing in that north pasture, looking like you were ready to take on the whole world by yourself." "I thought you were just a drifter," Eleanor said, laughing a little breathlessly. "Just another man passing through." "I was. But I am not anymore. I am staying, Eleanor. I am staying." They stood holding each other in the barn, and Eleanor felt something she had not felt since her father died. Hope. Real, solid hope that maybe she would not have to face the future alone. That maybe, against all odds and propriety, she had found someone who saw her not as a burden to be managed or an obstacle to be overcome, but as a partner worth fighting beside. The sound of footsteps outside made them step apart quickly. Jack appeared in the doorway, took one look at their faces, and sighed. "I do not suppose there is any point in me pretending I did not see that." Jack, Eleanor began, but he held up a hand. Save it. Your personal life is your business, Miss Kane. But people will talk, and Morrison will use it against you if he can. You need to be smart about this. I intend to be, Eleanor said, lifting her chin. Mr. Jones will be staying on as a permanent hand. Whatever else develops between us will develop properly and in its own time. Jack looked at Carson. You hurt her, drift or not, I will hunt you down myself. I would expect nothing less, Carson replied steadily, but I have no intention of hurting her. Ever. Jack nodded, apparently satisfied, and left them alone again. Eleanor looked at Carson and started to laugh, a release of tension and joy mixed together. Well, that could have gone worse. Could it have? But Carson was smiling too. Eleanor, we should probably talk about how we want to handle this. Jack is right that people will gossip, and Morrison is looking for any excuse to question your judgment. Then we will be careful and discreet, Eleanor said. At least for now. I do not want to hide what I feel for you, Carson, but I also cannot afford to give my enemies ammunition. The ranch has to come first. The ranch comes first, Carson agreed, but that does not mean we cannot work toward a future where we do not have to hide. They talked long into the night, making plans both practical and personal. Carson would continue working as a ranch hand, but gradually take on more responsibility. Eleanor would continue managing the business side while learning more about the day-to-day operations. They would be careful about public displays of affection, mindful of propriety while their relationship developed. And they would face whatever challenges came together as partners. Over the following weeks, their relationship deepened in quiet moments stolen between work. Conversations during evening rides to check on distant pastures, shared glances across the supper table, occasional touches when no one was watching. Eleanor found herself falling deeper in love with him every day, drawn not just to his strength and capability, but to his kindness, his quiet sense of humor, the way he listened when she talked about her fears and dreams. The ranch began to stabilize under their combined efforts. The cattle were healthy, the fences repaired, the water sources secured. Eleanor grew more confident in her business decisions, and the remaining hands responded well to the clear leadership structure. Even some of the men who had left began to drift back, hearing that the Kane ranch was not failing as predicted. But Morrison was not finished making trouble. In late September, he filed a claim with the land office suggesting that the boundary markers between their properties had been incorrectly placed, and that a significant portion of Eleanor's north pasture actually belonged to him. The claim was baseless, according to her father's deeds and surveys, but it required time and money to fight, resources Eleanor could barely spare. He is trying to bleed you dry with legal fees, Carson said, studying the documents by lamplight in her father's study. They had fallen into the habit of working together on business matters in the evening, his practical experience complementing her growing understanding of ranch management. He is succeeding, Eleanor said tiredly. The lawyer in town wants a retainer I can barely afford, and the surveyor will cost even more. Even if I win, the expense might cripple me. Carson was quiet for a long moment. I have some money saved, not a lot, but enough to help with the legal fees. Carson, no, I cannot take your savings. You are not taking anything. I am investing in our future. He reached across the desk and took her hand. This ranch is your legacy, Eleanor. It is worth fighting for. Let me help. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. You have already given so much. You work harder than anyone, you ask for less pay than you are worth, and you have stood by me through everything. I cannot ask you for more. You are not asking. I am offering. There is a difference. In the end, she accepted, though it hurt her pride to do so. With Carson's contribution and a careful restructuring of some expenses, they were able to hire the lawyer and the surveyor. The process dragged on for weeks, requiring trips to town for meetings and depositions, time away from the ranch that Eleanor could ill afford. Through it all, Carson remained her anchor. On the difficult days when she wanted to give up, when Morrison's attacks seemed relentless and the future appeared bleak, Carson reminded her why she was fighting. Not just for land or legacy, but for the right to determine her own destiny, to prove that a woman could stand on her own and succeed. The boundary dispute finally resolved in Eleanor's favor in early November, with the surveyor confirming that her father's property markers were correctly placed and Morrison's claim was without merit. The victory should have felt triumphant, but Eleanor was exhausted, worn down by months of struggle and uncertainty. "It is over," she said to Carson that evening, standing in the barn where they had first confessed their feelings. "The judge ruled in my favor. The land is mine, legally and undisputedly." "That is wonderful news," Carson said, but his smile faded when he saw her face. "Eleanor, what is wrong?" "I am tired, Carson, so tired. I have been fighting so hard for so long, and I just want it to be done. I want to stop worrying about whether the ranch will survive, whether I am making the right decisions, whether the next disaster is waiting around the corner. I want to just live." He pulled her into his arms and she let herself collapse against him, feeling the steady beat of his heart, the solid comfort of his presence. "Then let us live," he said softly. "We have fought the battle and won. Now we get to enjoy the peace." Eleanor pulled back to look up at him. "Do you think there can be peace? This is the Wild West, Carson. There is always another fight. Maybe, but we do not have to face them alone." He hesitated, then seemed to come to a decision. "Marry me, Eleanor," her breath caught. "What?" "I know this is not how proposals are supposed to happen. I should ask you properly with a ring and pretty words. But I have been carrying this question inside me for weeks now, and I cannot wait any more. I love you. I want to spend my life with you, building something lasting together. Marry me." Eleanor felt joy surge through her, washing away the exhaustion and fear. "Yes, yes, Carson, I will marry you." He kissed her then, deep and passionate and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both were grinning like fools. "I do not have a ring yet," Carson admitted. "But I will get you one, the prettiest one I can find." "I do not need a ring. I just need you." But Carson was determined, and the next time he went to town, he returned with a simple gold band set with a small diamond. It was not elaborate, but to Eleanor it was perfect, a symbol of his commitment and love. They decided to marry quickly and quietly, not because they were ashamed, but because they wanted the moment to be theirs without spectacle or gossip. On a cold December morning, with Jack and Mrs. Henley as witnesses, they stood before the minister in Rock Springs and pledged their lives to each other. Eleanor wore her mother's best dress, altered to fit. Carson wore a new suit bought for the occasion, looking uncomfortable but handsome in the formal clothes. "Do you, Carson Jones, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "And do you, Eleanor Kane, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." "Then, by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Carson did, thoroughly, while Jack coughed politely and Mrs. Henley dabbed at her eyes with her handkerchief. When they emerged from the church as Mr. and Mrs. Carson Jones, snow was beginning to fall, dusting the world in white. "A good omen," Mrs. Henley declared. "Snow on your wedding day means prosperity and happiness." Eleanor hoped she was right. She had fought so hard to keep her ranch, her independence, her father's legacy. Now she was choosing to share it with someone, to build a partnership rather than struggle alone. It felt both terrifying and exactly right. The first months of their marriage were an adjustment. Eleanor had lived alone for so long that sharing her space, even with someone she loved, required compromise and patience. Carson moved his few possessions from the bunkhouse into the ranch house, a transition that was both symbolic and practical. He was no longer just a hired hand but a full partner in the operation, making decisions and shouldering responsibilities as an equal. Some of the hands struggled with the new arrangement at first. Taking orders from Eleanor had been difficult enough for some of them. Taking orders from Carson, who had started as just another drifter, proved even harder. But Carson had a way of commanding respect through competence and fairness rather than bluster, and gradually even the most skeptical hands came around. Jack remained a steady presence, the bridge between old and new. "Your father would have approved," he told Eleanor one day. "Not just of Jones, though I think he would have liked him, but of how you have handled everything. You have grown into a fine rancher, Miss Kane. Mrs. Jones, I should say. I could not have done it without you, Jack, without all of you. Maybe. But you are the one who held everything together when it would have been easier to sell and walk away. That takes strength." Winter deepened, bringing challenges of its own. Cattle had to be moved to protected valleys. Feed had to be carefully managed. Pipes froze and had to be thawed. But Eleanor and Carson faced each challenge together, their partnership growing stronger with each obstacle overcome. In the quiet evenings, when the work was done and they sat before the fire in the front room, Eleanor felt a contentment she had never imagined possible. Carson would read while she worked on mending or accounts, their silence comfortable and companionable. Sometimes they would talk for hours about their dreams for the ranch, about expanding the herd or improving the bloodlines, about maybe building a new barn or updating the irrigation system. "Do you ever regret it?" Eleanor asked one night. "Giving up your freedom to settle here?" Carson looked up from his book, his expression genuinely surprised. "Not once. Not even for a moment. Eleanor, I spent 10 years drifting because I had nothing to anchor me. You gave me something worth staying for. You gave me a home." "We gave each other a home," Eleanor said softly. Spring came with renewal and hope. The cattle calved successfully, adding to their herd. The grass grew thick and lush after good winter snow. Prices for beef remained strong. The ranch not only survived but began to thrive. The doubters forced to acknowledge that Eleanor had not just maintained her father's legacy, but was building upon it. Morrison finally gave up his attempts to acquire her land, turning his attention to easier targets. Eleanor heard through town gossip that he had made an offer on a smaller spread to the north and been accepted. She felt relief that his attention was finally directed elsewhere. In May, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but wanted to be certain before telling Carson. When she finally shared the news, his face transformed with such pure joy that she felt tears spring to her eyes. "A baby," he said wonderingly, placing his hand gently over her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Happy does not begin to cover it. "Eleanor, you have given me everything. A home, a purpose, and now a family. I cannot believe how lucky I am." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer. Eleanor continued working on the ranch, though Carson and Jack conspired to keep the heaviest tasks away from her. She found it both annoying and endearing, their overprotective concern. "I am pregnant, not fragile," she protested when Carson tried to stop her from riding out to check on the cattle. "I know that, but humor me. I have never been a father before, and I am terrified I am going to do something wrong." She kissed him, softening the frustration. "You are going to be a wonderful father, but you have to let me continue being myself, Carson. I am still a rancher." They found a balance, as they did with everything, through communication and compromise. Eleanor continued to work, but accepted reasonable limitations. Carson channeled his anxiety into preparing the house for the baby, building a cradle with his own hands, painting one of the spare rooms in cheerful colors. In January of 1884, during one of the worst blizzards Wyoming had seen in years, Eleanor went into labor. Mrs. Henley and the doctor from town were both snowbound at the ranch, which turned out to be fortunate. The labor was long and difficult, and Carson paced outside the bedroom door like a caged animal, jumping every time Eleanor cried out. Finally, after 14 hours, the sound of a baby's cry cut through the house. Mrs. Henley opened the door, her face exhausted but smiling. "You have a son, Mr. Jones, a healthy baby boy." Carson burst into the room to find Eleanor propped up in bed, sweaty and exhausted but glowing with happiness, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up at him with such love that he felt his heart might burst. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Carson approached carefully, almost afraid, and looked down at the small red face peeking from the blankets. The baby had a shock of dark hair, and when he opened his eyes briefly, they were blue. Tiny perfect fingers curled into fists. Carson reached out one finger and the baby's hand wrapped around it with surprising strength. "He is beautiful," Carson whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "He is perfect." "What should we name him?" Eleanor asked. They had discussed names for months but never quite settled on one. Now, looking at his son, Carson thought of his own father, the man who had lost everything but taught his son about dignity and hard work before he died. "I was thinking maybe Thomas after your father, and William was my father's name, Thomas William Jones." Eleanor smiled, tears streaming down her face. "Thomas William Jones. Tommy, I love it." The baby thrived, and with him the family. Tommy was a good-natured infant, curious and alert, and both his parents doted on him shamelessly. The ranch hands took turns admiring him, even the gruffest among them softening at the sight of the tiny boy. Jack became an unofficial grandfather, carving toys and telling stories. Mrs. Henley spoiled Tommy with baked treats as soon as he was old enough to eat them. The boy grew up surrounded by love and the wide open spaces of the Wyoming ranch, learning to walk in the dust of the yard, learning to talk to the sound of cattle lowing in the distance. As Tommy grew, Eleanor and Carson continued to build their life together. The ranch prospered under their joint management, growing into one of the most successful operations in the region. They bought more land, hired more hands, improved their breeding stock. Eleanor's reputation as a shrewd businesswoman spread, and Carson's skill with horses became legendary in the territory. But their greatest success was not measured in acres or cattle or dollars. It was measured in the strong marriage they built, founded on mutual respect and deep love. It was measured in the children that followed Tommy. A daughter named Margaret after Eleanor's mother, then twin boys they named Jack and Charles, and finally another daughter, Sarah. The ranch house expanded to accommodate the growing family, additions built onto the original structure. The barn was rebuilt, larger and more modern. Fences stretched across thousands of acres. The Kane brand, which Eleanor kept in honor of her father, became known throughout Wyoming and beyond. Carson never lost his skill with horses, teaching each of his children to ride almost as soon as they could walk. He remained a man of few words but deep feeling, showing his love through actions rather than speeches. Eleanor blossomed into a confident rancher and businesswoman, respected and even feared by competitors, but always soft with her family. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Carson presented Eleanor with a gift, the deed to the ranch, transferred into both their names officially. It had always been understood that they owned it together, but this made it legal and permanent. You have earned this 1,000 times over, Eleanor said, touched by the gesture. We earned it together, Carson replied. Everything we have, we built as partners. I wanted the legal documents to reflect that. They stood on the porch of their house, watching the sun set over their land, over the cattle bearing their brand, over the life they had created together. Tommy and Margaret were playing in the yard under the watchful eye of Mrs. Henley, now elderly but still part of the family. The twins were with Jack, learning to rope. Sarah slept peacefully in her cradle inside. You ever think about that day we met? Eleanor asked, leaning into Carson's embrace. When you rode up asking for directions. I think about it often. How different my life would be if I had just ridden past your ranch instead of stopping, if I had not been looking for a reason to stop drifting. I thought you were just a cowboy passing through, just another drifter with no ties and no future. Carson turned her to face him, his pale gray eyes still as striking as they had been that first day, though now surrounded by laugh lines. I was a drifter until the moment I met you, but then I found something worth staying for. I found you. I am glad you stayed, Eleanor whispered. I am so glad you stayed. So am I. Every single day I am grateful I made that choice. They kissed as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and red, surrounded by the life they had built together, the family they had created, the legacy they were leaving for their children. The Wild West was slowly being tamed, civilization encroaching on the open range, but here on their ranch, they had carved out something lasting and true. Years passed, bringing both joy and sorrow as all lives do. Jack eventually retired, living his final years in a small house on the ranch property, surrounded by the family he had helped hold together. Mrs. Henley passed peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78, mourned by everyone who had known her. New hands came and went, but a core group remained, loyal to the Jones family and the fair treatment they received. Tommy grew into a fine young man, inheriting his mother's business sense and his father's way with horses. He eventually took over much of the day-to-day running of the ranch, allowing Eleanor and Carson to step back and enjoy their later years. Margaret married a banker from Cheyenne, giving them grandchildren to spoil. The twins both became ranchers in their own right, starting spreads of their own with their parents' help and guidance. Sarah, the baby, surprised everyone by becoming a teacher, opening a school in Rock Springs for ranch children who otherwise would have gone uneducated. Through it all, Eleanor and Carson remained devoted to each other, their love deepening with time rather than fading. They had built something extraordinary together, not just a successful ranch but a true partnership, a family, a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. On a warm summer evening in 1912, 30 years after they first met, Eleanor and Carson sat together on the porch swing Carson had built for their 20th anniversary. Both were graying now, their faces lined with the marks of hard work and laughter. Eleanor's hands, once so worried about the blood that would not wash away, were now spotted with age but still strong. Carson moved a bit slower, his joints stiff from years of hard riding and manual labor, but his eyes were still the same clear gray, still looking at Eleanor with the same love and devotion. You ever regret it? Carson asked, echoing Eleanor's question from so many years ago. Marrying a drifter with nothing to his name but the horse he rode in on, Eleanor laughed, the sound still bright and full of life. Not once, not even for a moment. You gave me everything, Carson. You stood beside me when everyone else doubted. You helped me save my father's ranch and then helped me build it into something even greater. You gave me children and grandchildren and a life full of love. How could I possibly regret any of that? I was so nervous that day I asked you to marry me, Carson admitted. standing in that barn, knowing I had nothing to offer you but myself. I thought you might say no. I think I fell in love with you before I even knew your name, Eleanor said softly. When you rode up that day and looked at me like I was someone worth seeing, not just a woman in over her head. You saw me, Carson, really saw me, and you have been seeing me every day since. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their grandson, Tommy's oldest boy, practice his roping in the yard. The boy had Carson's eyes and Eleanor's determination, the next generation of the family they had created. I was just a drifter, Carson said quietly. Just a man with no home and no future, running from a past I could not change. But you gave me a reason to stop running. You gave me something worth staying for. We gave each other something worth staying for, Eleanor corrected gently. I was drowning when you arrived, Carson, drowning in responsibility and grief and fear. You threw me a rope and pulled me out. We saved each other. As the sun set over the Wyoming landscape they had called home for 3 decades, Eleanor Kane Jones and Carson Jones sat together, their hands intertwined, their lives completely interwoven. The ranch stretched out before them, thousands of acres of prosperous land, testament to their hard work and dedication. But more than that, it was a testament to love, to partnership, to the choice they had made to stand together against whatever came. The drifter had found his home. The young woman fighting to save her legacy had found a partner worthy of her strength. Together, they had built something that would last long after they were gone, a story that would be told by their children and grandchildren, about the cowboy who stopped drifting and the woman who gave him a reason to stay. Eleanor leaned her head on Carson's shoulder, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing, the solid warmth of him beside her. I love you, she said simply. I love you too, Carson replied, pressing a kiss to her hair. Today, tomorrow, and every day after, I am staying for you, Eleanor. Always staying for you. And as the stars began to emerge overhead, the same stars that had witnessed their first kiss in a barn so many years ago, Eleanor knew that she had everything she had ever needed. Not just the ranch, not just the legacy, but this man beside her, this life they had built, this love that had endured and grown through decades of joy and struggle. The Wild West was changing, the frontier closing, the old ways giving way to new. But here, on this ranch, in this love, something timeless remained. Something worth fighting for, worth staying for, worth building a life around. The drifter had found his home. And that home had given him a family, a purpose, and a love that would last beyond their lifetimes, carried forward by the children and grandchildren and generations yet to come. Eleanor and Carson lived many more years together, growing old side by side, watching their family expand and flourish. When Carson passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 75, with Eleanor holding his hand, his last words were of love and gratitude for the life they had shared. Eleanor followed him 2 years later, having made sure that the ranch was secured for future generations, that their children were settled and happy, that everything they had built would endure. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, their graves marked with simple stones bearing their names and the dates that bracketed their time together. The inscription, chosen by Tommy with input from all his siblings, reads simply, "Together they built a legacy of love." And so the story of the drifter and the woman he stayed for became part of the history of Rock Springs, Wyoming, told and retold by descendants and townspeople. A reminder that sometimes the greatest journeys end not in distant places, but in the decision to finally stop moving and build something lasting with someone worth staying for. The ranch continued for generations, still bearing the Kane brand, still home to the descendants of Eleanor and Carson. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blew just right across the Wyoming plains, old-timers swore they could still see two figures on the porch of the old ranch house, sitting close together, watching the sun set over the land they had fought so hard to keep, the land that had become home to a drifter who found his reason to stay. The end.